February 1968, a canal bridge on the southern edge of Hue in central Vietnam. A squat tracked machine clanks across the span, no taller than a man at its roof, bristling with 6 long tubes welded to its flanks in 2 vertical stacks. Behind it, Marines in flak jackets advance on foot, eyes locked on the shattered windows of the Treasury building ahead. It does not look like a tank. It does not look like anything. 9 tons of welded steel, half an inch thick at its thickest point, an engine from a Chevrolet truck, 6 recoilless rifles that cannot be reloaded from inside the hull. To feed them, a Marine has to climb out, stand exposed at the rear, and shove 38-pound shells into 6 open breeches while snipers watch from across the street. The army that invented it walked away. The Chief of Staff called it a doctrinal dead end. Procurement officers pointed at the ammunition racks, only 18 rounds, and at the armour, stopped by anything bigger than a rifle bullet, and closed the book. The Marines took it anyway. They had nothing else that could be slung off a landing ship or dropped from a cargo aircraft. They bought 297 of them, shipped them to Vietnam, and on a February morning in the imperial capital of Hue, they discovered something the army never had. Against brick, against plaster, against the command bunkers of the North Vietnamese 4th Regiment, this rejected machine did what 50-ton Patton tanks could not. Its designation was the M50 Ontos, Greek for the Thing, and it was the failed airborne tank destroyer that broke walls in the oldest city in Vietnam. To understand why the Ontos existed, you need to understand the fear America felt in 1950. The Red Army had rolled into Berlin 5 years earlier with thousands of tanks. West Germany lay flat and open, a tank highway aimed at the English Channel. And the United States, having demobilized, had almost nothing credible in Europe to stop it. The Pentagon wanted a weapon cheap enough to build by the thousand, light enough to be airlifted into a crumbling front, and deadly enough to kill a Soviet T-54 before it reached Antwerp. The study came from Caltech. Project Vista, in late 1950 and early 1951, urged the army to flood Europe with cheap, expendable tank killers. The contract went to Allis-Chalmers, a farm machinery company in LaPorte, Indiana, that had never built a combat vehicle. Specifications were firmed at Detroit Arsenal. Ground pressure under 4 pounds per square inch, a General Motors truck engine, 3 men, half-inch armour, 12,000 pounds. The designation marched through the alphabet. The T-55 and T-56 were stillborn armoured personnel carriers. The T-164 mounted 4 recoilless rifles. The T-165, with 6 rifles bolted to its flanks, became the weapon. A refined variant was standardised in January 1955 as the M50 Ontos. Inside the army, it became a civil war. Secretary of the Army Frank Pace wanted 100 of them for the price of 1 tank. Chief of Staff General Lawton Collins hated it. Hated the idea. Hated any weapon that threatened the tank's place at the centre of American armour doctrine. On January 9, 1953, Collins sent Pace a memo listing its flaws and recommended buying only 300 for field testing. Pace, packing his office, did not fight him. The Army's verdict was in by 1955. Only 18 rounds of main gun ammunition, gone in a minute of combat. Half-inch armour that stopped nothing heavier than a rifle round. A silhouette too tall to hide. And the damning flaw, the one no engineer could solve. The 6 guns bolted to the outside of the hull, meaning the loader had to climb out and stand in the open to reload. The Army cancelled its share of a 1,000-vehicle order. The Marine Corps took what was left. Still riding ageing Shermans, desperate for anything that could fit in a landing craft or a cargo plane, the Marines signed a contract on August 12, 1955. Allis-Chalmers built 297. Not one more was ever built. The final specifications remain striking. Combat weight, 19,050 pounds, more than 50% heavier than the design target. Length, 12 feet 7 inches. Width, 8 feet 6 inches. Height, 7 feet. The welded steel hull offered half an inch of protection at its thickest point, a quarter inch on the floor. The 6 rifles were the point. Actually 105mm in bore, they were labelled 106mm to prevent confusion with older, incompatible ammunition. The turret traversed 40 degrees either side. The crew carried 18 shells, high explosive anti-tank rounds for armour and walls, high explosive plastic for fortifications, and the beehive round, a single shell packed with approximately 9,900 steel flechettes, a shotgun shell the size of a fire extinguisher. 450 caliber spotting rifles rode atop the upper 4 guns. Their tracer rounds flew the same ballistic path as the main rounds, so a gunner could fire one tracer, watch it hit, then touch off any combination of the 6 main barrels with electric solenoids. The danger zone behind the breeches, ground-mounted, extended 25 metres, roughly 82 feet. Double that in freezing weather, and still the loader had to climb out. 6 breeches, 38-pound shells, hands working in the open, shoot and run. Before we see what happened when this thing reached Vietnam, a quick note. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Cold War engineering, hitting subscribe genuinely helps the channel. It takes a second, it costs nothing, and it is how these stories find more people. Now, to Hue. The Tet Offensive broke on January 31st, 1968. In the hours before dawn, 8 North Vietnamese Army battalions stormed the imperial capital of Hue on the Perfume River. By morning, the ancient walled citadel on the north bank was theirs. Over the next 26 days, 3 Marine Rifle battalions and 1 Army brigade fought house to house to take it back. 250 Marines would die in the fighting. More than 5,000 enemy soldiers would die with them. Task Force X-Ray under Brigadier General Foster LaHue coordinated the Marine response from Phu Bai. On February 3rd, command of Marine forces inside the city passed to Colonel Stanley Hughes of the 1st Marines. Under him, 3 battalions did the killing. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Gravel's 1st Battalion 1st Marines, Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham's 2nd Battalion 5th Marines, and Major Robert Thompson's 1st Battalion 5th Marines, tasked with retaking the citadel itself. The Ontos unit at Hue was Captain Conwell Casey's A Company, 1st Tank Battalion, which had absorbed the last surviving Ontos platoons when the anti-tank battalions were dissolved a month earlier. Roughly 10 vehicles distributed in pairs and fours went into the city. Their first action came on February 2nd. Captain Ron Christmas's Hotel Company of 2nd Battalion 5th Marines crossed the Phu Cam Canal Bridge screened by 2 Ontos and Army Quad 50 trucks. Over the next 4 days, Cheatham's battalion ground westward into the densest urban fighting Marines had seen since Seoul in 1950. Treasury Building, Post Office, Thua Thien Provincial Headquarters, the North Vietnamese 4th Regiment's command post. On February 6th, assaulting the provincial headquarters, an Ontos moved forward to blast an entry hole through a courtyard wall. A B-40 rocket hit it broadside. The vehicle was destroyed. Cheatham's Navy Cross citation would later record that, calling an Ontos forward, he directed effective suppressive fire on the enemy, and then courageously led his unit as it continued the assault. February 7th brought 2 more losses. In the city, an Ontos supporting 1st Battalion 1st Marines was knocked out. Its driver was killed. Outside Hue, on the resupply road, 2 Ontos escorting a convoy of 18 vehicles were ambushed from dense brush. The convoy commander, Captain Ronald Brown, died in the engagement. The Citadel fight began on February 11th. Thompson's battalion came ashore at the landing craft ramp by night. The scheme of manoeuvre, documented in the Armour Branch Journal, placed 2 tanks forward, 2 infantry companies abreast, a reserve company behind, and the Ontos firing 6 gun salvos of canister from the flanks. The tanks ran into a problem fast. Their high explosive plastic rounds bounced off the Citadel's ancient stone. Crews switched to armour piercing. Then, in the middle of the battle, concrete-piercing 90mm shells were flown up from Da Nang. The Ontos needed no such workaround. Its warheads punched straight through masonry, brick and wood frame alike. The Dongbar Tower, a gate tower on the Citadel's eastern wall, fell to Captain Myron Harrington's Delta Company on February 15th, after 3 days of combined tank, Ontos, naval gunfire and 4 airstrikes. Harrington earned the Navy Cross. Thompson himself, in a later interview with Leatherneck magazine, described his armour crews returning at sundown. They reminded him, he said, of knights coming back to the castle after fighting the dragon all day. Asked what he would have done without them, Thompson replied flatly that they would have won anyway. It would just have taken longer and cost more than the 60% casualty rate his battalion had already taken. The definitive verdict came from Colonel Hughes. In his Combat After Action report dated March 20th, 1968, Hughes called the Ontos the most effective of all Marine supporting arms. At 300 to 500 yards, he wrote, its rifles routinely opened 4 square metre holes in buildings, or knocked out entire exterior walls. Cheatham, in oral histories, put it more plainly. The Ontos, he said, was as big a help as any piece of gear he had that was not organic to his battalion. Hue was the peak, but not the whole war. The 1st Ontos had landed with the 9th Marine Expeditionary Brigade at Da Nang on March 8th, 1965. They saw Operation Starlight that August, their combat debut, providing flank protection when an enemy recoilless rifle disabled a Patton. They fought Operation J in 1966, where a platoon obliterated a Viet Cong squad on a ridgeline with a single 6-gun salvo. On March 27th, 1967. 2 Ontos rolled up Route 9 with the first convoy to reach Khe in 3 years. By the siege of early 1968, 10 Ontos formed part of Colonel David Lowndes' perimeter, their flechette rounds aimed at the tree lines, and at Con Thien on September 10, 1967, Lance Corporal Randall Browning earned his own Navy cross-directing canister fire against a North Vietnamese assault. An eyewitness described it in a single line. It mowed them down like they were corn. On paper, the Soviet answer to the Ontos concept should have looked superior. The ASU-85, a 15-ton airborne assault gun mounting an 85mm cannon behind an enclosed casemate, carried real armour, longer range, and served the Warsaw Pact until 1993. West Germany fielded the cannon-enjagd Panzer, 27.5 tons of sloped steel, with a 90mm gun, 770, built through the late 1960s, but neither vehicle did what the Ontos did. Neither mounted multiple recoilless rifles as primary armament, neither could put 6 warheads into a single window at 300 yards in the span of 2 seconds. The Soviets built their airborne tank killers to shoot once from concealment and withdraw. The Germans built theirs to ambush columns on the North German plain. The Marines, without meaning to, built a building buster. The other American comparison was closer to home. The M48 Patton, the other armoured vehicle Marines took to Vietnam, weighed 50 tons and mounted a 90mm main gun. It could absorb rocket hits that would have split an Ontos in half. It could not cross the pontoon bridges or the narrow courtyards where Hue's fight was decided. Captain Casey summed the division of labour in a single line. The Ontos was primarily used as a backup for the tank. It was primarily a building buster. Replacement came through attrition, not design. Allis-Chalmers had closed the production line in November 1957. No more vehicles would ever be built. Track sections and road wheels ran out. Spare engines were cannibalized from wrecks. In December 1967, the Marine anti-tank battalions were dissolved, their Ontos reassigned to tank battalion anti-tank companies. By March 1969, most remaining vehicles were rated as of limited combat readiness and placed in static firing positions along the wire. Marine Ontos units were officially deactivated in May 1969. The last hulls came home through 1970. A handful kept fighting. The Ontos' only confirmed armour kills came not in Vietnam but in Santo Domingo, during the Dominican Civil War of 1965, where Marine Ontos destroyed 2 rebel tanks in single engagements. Others served at the Guantanamo Bay perimeter until April 1980, the last operational Ontos in American service. Roughly a dozen survive today. Examples sit at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Virginia, at the Patton Museum in Kentucky, and in armour collections across the United States. No foreign operator ever fielded a new one. Production had ended before the weapon had even seen its war. February 1968. The canal bridge at the southern edge of Hue. The squat, tracked machine clanks back across the span at dusk. 6 barrels stained with soot. Crew filthy and red-eyed. A loader with his hands still bleeding from the breechwork. The flaws were all real. Too few rounds, gone in a minute of sustained fire. Armour too thin to stop anything serious. A silhouette that could not hide. An engine meant for a delivery truck. And a loader who had to leave the vehicle's only protection every time the guns ran dry. And yet it worked. It worked in the streets of Hue, where its salvos opened 4-metre holes in NVA-held walls. It worked on the perimeter at Khe Sanh, where its flechette rounds waited for a human wave that, in the end, did not come. It worked on a ridgeline during Operation J, where it killed a squad with a single volley. It worked at Con Thien, where Browning's canister mowed attackers down like corn. It worked on the streets of Santo Domingo, where it killed rebel tanks it was never seriously expected to fight. 6 recoilless rifles, 38-pound shells, delivered from a chassis the size of a family car. That is not elegance. That is the difference between a weapon designed for the war you expected and a weapon that won the war you got. The Army didn't want it. The Marines won Hue with it.